Good evening, everyone. I'm Larry Mohn, president of the Manhattan Institute, and thank you for joining us tonight for the 13th annual Hayek discussion. We're here to honor the legacy of Friedrich Hayek, which is more relevant today than ever. Hayek spent his life articulating many of the Manhattan Institute's founding principles, but he also had a more direct role in our creation. Sir Anthony Fisher, a British philanthropist, had also planned to go into politics until Hayek, his friend and intellectual hero, gave him different advice to found public policy think tanks whose research and original thought could influence policy around the world. Without that advice, we may well not have had the Atlas Network and its global network of market-oriented think tanks, the Pacific Institute in California, and indeed the Manhattan Institute. And we have not forgotten the role he played as Manhattan Institute celebrates its 40th anniversary this year. Hayek's philosophy continues to be a crucial guide for everything we do. The Hayek Prize is among the largest book prizes in the world, and that in itself is a testament to how seriously we take his legacy. That's why we're honored and grateful for the generosity of Tom and Diane Smith, who have initiated and supported the Hayek Prize and lecture since its inception. Before we begin, we've created a short video that highlights the many outstanding finalists our prize committee considered this year. I hope you enjoy it.
This year, the theme of the Hayek Prize is what's called the knowledge problem. Mainstream economists tend to say, let's figure out something we can tweak. Hayek said, economics is not about tweaking. Knowledge in the world is all over the place, and no one mind can know it all.
The market is an adaptation to thousands of circumstances which nobody ever can know as a whole, and where the prices tell the individual what to do and what not to do in the social interest.
A good economist has a measure of humility. He sees something complex, and he doesn't purport to be able to explain it all with a bunch of charts. There are a lot of book prizes in the world, but very few for free market books or books in the spirit of Hayek. Donor Tom Smith and the Manhattan Institute stepped forward to say, yes, we can reward free market thinking. And the generosity of the prize reflects that impulse. And this year's jury found some wonderful books that highlight the arrogance of economics and the importance of the free market. Joel Mokir's Culture of Growth looks at the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries and says, well, the Industrial Revolution didn't have to happen. It happened because ideas came together. He points out the role not only of the printing press, but of the Republic of Letters, of the post office, of the writers that gave a great discussion about innovation and ideas that then in turn gave us revolutions such as the Industrial Revolution. Hayek spoke of the danger of social planning. Nowhere is that demonstrated more vividly than by Thomas Leonard in his Illiberal Reformers. And what he shows is that social scientists were also eugenicists. They believed, they took their science, let's improve the world, they took it over to the rearing of people, to the selection of people, and who lived and who died. Johan Norbuck has a fabulous book called Progress, which says progress happens thanks to individuals, thanks to ideas, but in spite of planning. For the second year in a row, Wei-Ying Zhang is a finalist. His book, The Logic of the Market, looks at the folly of planning in China. And he shows that Keynesian interventions, well, they're not doing very well for the structure and growth of China. The real heart of China, the true growth, is the innovation by the Chinese people, individual Chinese who have ideas. And the winner of the Hayek Prize was someone who pulled the knowledge problem together on many levels. That's Deirdre McCloskey. In the traditional view, the Marxist view, there's something deterministic and giant about the way the world works. McCloskey says, hold on, wait a minute. It's not even the individuals, it's the ideas they bring to the table. What these books remind us is there's no better guide to interpreting our era than Friedrich von Hayek.
Okay.
Bravo.
And now, I'd like to invite Amity Schlaze, the chair of the Hayek Prize, to the stage to introduce our winner, Deirdre McCloskey.
That was a wonderful video by Jim Epstein. We're very grateful to him. This year's Hayek Prize, the 2017 Hayek, was a tough choice. I'd like to, at this point, thank our jurors, some of whom are present, I believe. Diana Furchtgott-Roth. Please stand. Marty Zupan. Please stand so we can see you. Tom Easton. Larry Moan. Brian Anderson. Jim Pearson. Dr. Casey Mulligan, Dr. John Taylor, and Don Boudreau, who I don't think are here, though we wish they were. I'd also like to thank the staff of the Manhattan Institute, Dean Ball, who ran this show, Taisha Camacho, Brian Anderson, and Howard Husak tonight. I'll just add a couple words. As our video conveyed, one of the main challenges today is the narrowness of the Guild of Economics. All our finalists captured this narrowness and thereby contributed invaluably to the reform and widening of this key trade. That's also true just for background, past winners and finalists. The winners, in fact, boosted by this prize, Tom and Diane Smith, gained authority. And a good example of that is Yang Jisheng of China, who wrote about the Great Leap Forward and that it was not one. And he became better known for his analysis of the tragic period in China. A more proximate example is Philip Hamburger, who spoke to us last year when he won, who has suddenly become the guru of the reform of the administrative state. That is the value of the incentive of the prize. I'd like to congratulate the finalists, Tom Leonard, Joan Norberg, Wei-Yin Zhang, and Joel Mokyr, but just add a couple words and say few of our candidates over the years have taken on the economic establishment as Deirdre McCloskey does. Notice the subtitle of her work. In a way, it's as important as the title, How Ideas, Not Capital or Institutions Enriched the World. Starting in the early 1980s, I believe, Dr. McCloskey did more than any other scholar to urge economists to do research-based work, real-world relevance. She warned economists to cease, say, on the one hand, their armchair theorizing, and on the other, their mindless data mining. And when she did that, she was heeded. Her methodology in economic history has changed the minds of her peers. In a way, Dr. McCloskey writes her books to make the case to and for the people in this room. That's because she is concerned that professors don't always take into account the achievements of what we, for want of a better word, perhaps bourgeois, call the middle class, merchants, doctors, bankers, tradesmen. What her books say is bourgeois dignity matters. You've seen that title before. Your contribution, your ideas are a major part of the story. As a result of her identification of the importance of ideas and growth, the field has become more welcoming for Austrian and other non-mainstream economists by insisting that the central imposition of a single scientific method makes no more sense than does the central imposition of a single economic plan. Deirdre McCloskey has opened doors for scholars working in the Hayekian tradition. To interview Dr. McCloskey, we have the luck to have the world's best interviewer, Howard Husak, Vice President of the Manhattan Institute. Oh, I hope I haven't offended today, but I'll stick with that. Importantly, Howard, as you know, is one of the finest policy minds himself. Long before 2008, for example, he published a prescient book on our housing troubles, which I have on my shelf for my next book, The $1 Trillion Housing Mistake. And tonight, Howard will interview Dr. McCloskey, and we'll open the event to your questions. Please join me in welcoming them for an exciting discussion.
Well, needless to say, that will be hard to live up to. I have to start off by saying what an extraordinary book this is. It's for sale outside. I know Dr. McCloskey will autograph it.
I'll sign it.
It's the culmination of a 3-book trilogy, Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics for an Age of Commerce, Bourgeois Dignity, Why Economics Can't Explain the Modern World, and Bourgeois Equality, this one, How Ideas, Not Capital or Institutions, Enriched the World. I would compare it in its scope and its ambition to that of a 19th century social scientist with some impact, Karl Marx, and Das Kapital, which was also a vast life's work.
It was.
And I think that it's to be sure that you had that in mind.
Yes, I certainly had that in mind. I'm a reformed Marxist. Very reformed.
And in this book, I think it's fair to say, economics meets the humanities on a grand scale, because on one page, you can be reading about Jack Kerouac and La Boheme, and the next page you're reading about Thomas Macaulay and the Dutch Reformation, and on and on and on, even down to the Illinois State Constitution.
Yes.
You're the only person who's read that. Right?
I don't recommend it.
That's a way of saying that I'm daunted by the idea of doing justice to this book in a short period of time. We are going to do our damnedest. So I want to go through some of the key ideas, and you have these resonant phrases that guide us through your work. And it starts with something called the Great Enrichment. This is not a nutritional phrase, right?
No, it's not.
Tell us what the Great Enrichment was and how great it was.
Well, it's the extraordinary increase in real income per head, the amount of goods and services you can get for the average person in countries like Japan or the United States or Finland that have fully adopted the modern world, so to speak. And it's to be distinguished from the Industrial Revolution, which I admire and I think it's very nice. But there had been industrial revolutions before. Song China, for example, or the glory of Greece and the grandeur of Rome. There had been doublings of national income before, of income per head. But that's only 100%. This great enrichment, even conventionally measured, even not allowing for improvements in quality of goods and services, now hear this, was 3,000%. Your ancestors, I take it there are no descendants of the crowned heads of Europe here, maybe a few, but most of us, like me, come from, and you too, I'll bet, come from peasant stock. And we were unspeakably poor. And now we're unspeakably rich. And not all of us, there are still people in the world getting along on a horrible $2 or $3 a day. But that percentage and even those absolute numbers are falling like a stone. And the countries like China and India that are moving in this liberal economic direction, by which I mean free market, are making ordinary people in the world vastly better off.
And so when we say 9,000%, we're tracing this to...
No, not 9,000, 3,000. But you can also say 9,000 if you include improvements in quality, better glass, better economics, better lighting.
And so we date this to when?
1800 is the beginning, and that's after the beginning of the classic industrial revolution. And then it continues to the present day. You've heard a lot of pessimistic talk about the sky falling. My friend Bob Gordon and I had debated this.
Economist at Northwestern.
Northwestern at the Standard Club in Chicago about a month ago. And Bob says, oh no, things are getting, innovation is finished, says he. And the basic mistake that Bob makes, he's a wonderful scholar, is he forgets about the rest of the world. He's talking about the United States, which I do not think has become less innovative than it was, but let's suppose that's true. As I said, China and India, and now I think Sub-Saharan Africa and many other parts of the world are becoming the places where innovation happens. So we're going to all benefit from that, just as they benefited from the invention of, and invention isn't quite the word, the use of electricity.
Now, you treat this somewhat as a mystery.
It
right?
is a mystery.
In your logic, you're ruling things out as you go along, and you solve for something. You decide this is the key. Tell us about what you see as the key to the Great Enrichment.
Here's the mystery. Why didn't it happen before? If it's caused by, say, slavery, as a new generation of American historians have claimed, on the line of Lincoln's second inaugural. Hold on, there have been slave societies since the beginning of agriculture. If it's caused by trade, foreign trade, the Indian Ocean was the great place of trade until really the 19th century. In volume, it was much larger than certainly the Mediterranean trade, and much larger than the Atlantic trade until well into the 19th century. So why didn't India have the Great Enrichment? Why didn't China, which had excellent property rights, essentially a big free trade area with low taxation for the space of entire dynasties, 300 years, 200 years, 500 years? Why didn't it happen in China? So that's the deep puzzle. And that tool, that historical tool, I'm a historian as well as an economist, I guess, is
tenured in both, I might add.
Tenured in both, and in English and communications as well. Adjunct in philosophy and classics. Ask me anything. But that's the puzzle, and that's the deep mystery. And it's ever since the blessed Adam Smith wrote and inquire into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. That's been the central question in economics. And Smith couldn't have known how far his ideas would take us. From Smith to Hayek is the great development of the idea that free people become rich and wise, both. So yes, it is a mystery, but I come here to solve the mystery.
Yes, exactly right.
It's actually what Conan Doyle said in the voice of Sherlock Holmes. When you've eliminated all the possibilities, what's left, however implausible, is the answer.
Yes. And
the answer is ideas, as we were saying in the video. The answer is, it's kind of obvious, actually. In fact, it's so obvious, I'm kind of embarrassed to say it. It's, after all, innovation is something that individuals do. Corporations don't do it. Some individual in the corporation does it. says, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Take dropped ceilings, one of my favorite crazy examples.
Most people think about those a lot.
I think about them constantly. Dropped ceilings is a very simple idea. But if you're building a big concrete building, reinforced concrete, which is another great invention, dropped ceilings allow you to put the plumbing and everything up there, so it's easy to get to, and yet, everything's cool. Another spectacular example is the idea of containerization, which came to a North Carolina trucker, not really a trucker, he owned a trucking firm, but he started as a trucker in the middle 1950s. And containerization has made globalization. It's dropped the price of international transport by just this astonishing percentage. And so it's individuals. And then the question is, if it's not, capital's necessary, rule of law is necessary, non-civil wars are necessary, all those, it's good to have peace and so on. Of course it is. And those are necessary, but they're not sufficient. They don't do the trick. You have to have them, but they don't do the trick. They're dependent on this individual liberty. That's what does it. I give you, as the English say, I let you have a go, and let all of you have a go. And it's one of the great discoveries of the 19th century, first put forward as a possibility in the 18th, that when you let people have a go, they're fantastically creative. If you put them in a hierarchy and say, no, you're going to be a milkmaid for the rest of your life, shut up, then they don't.
And
They
so
are
this
creative.
idea that something had to change such that people could be permitted to have a go.
That's the key.
Right? So you take us back to the Netherlands, don't you?
I do.
That seems, talk
do.
about,
I do.
we're in New Amsterdam here.
Ik hou van Holland. I love the Dutch. I love Holland. And that's where the modern world began, was in this crummy mud flat on the mouth of the Rhine and the Meuse, they call it in France, but the Maas. These merchants who no one paid much attention to, servicing the German hinterland, they were very lightly feudalized, unlike northern France or England. So there weren't many unworking bosses around. They were just merchants. And, excuse me, out of that came the idea, yes, this is actually gin.
Okay, I'll have some too.
Yeah, I have some too. It's, out of that came the liberal idea. As Adam Smith again said, he called it the liberal plan, now here, of equality, liberty, and justice. Now, by equality, he didn't mean French equality, Rousseau, or Piketty, that is equality after income is produced, that you distribute it.
Piketty, he's the new guy.
He's the new guy.
Okay.
They tried to organize a debate between me, the BBC did, tried to organize a debate between me and him, but he wouldn't do it. Why should he debate with an obscure professor of economics and history? I mean, don't bother. But so equality in what I would call the Scottish sense.
Yes.
Hume, Adam Smith, and the Scottish Enlightenment, not the French. The idea of equal opportunity, of the equal right to the equal honor that we should give and do give for the most part to every member of our society. So equality, liberty, economic liberty is what Smith had in mind. Not voting or something, although that's interesting too, but the ability to start a hairdressing salon in your neighborhood when you want, and not having to go to the government to get a license for hair braiding, which you do now. In Tennessee, hear this is really interesting. In Tennessee, if you want to open a moving company, 2 guys in a truck, you have to get the permission, now hear this, of the existing moving companies.
Well, hospitals have certificates of need. It's the same idea, right?
Exactly. It's the same point. It's all over our society. It's becoming gradually worse. We're moving back to a medieval attitude towards regulation.
Okay, attitude. So before we get to this bad news,
Yeah,
let's hover on the good news for a while.
Good. I'm an optimist.
No, we'll get to the pushback too. But okay, so you talk about attitude. So in the book, it's not only that everyone has a right to have a go. It's not only that there's equality and liberty under the law.
Right.
It's that there's a certain attitude from others, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely crucial. It's, look, there's a long history of talking about entrepreneurship. Joseph Schumpeter, a great Austrian, although not quite an Austrian economist, he was an economist from Austria, not an Austrian economist, put it that way. And he wrote his first great book was on entrepreneurship. And there was a tendency for a long time, my friend and enemy David Landis was one of these people,
a cultural historian at Harvard.
A cultural historian, a marvelous guy, an excellent squash player. He said it was a psychological change. And I say, well, and Max Weber had the same idea. It was an internal psychological change, and people got more enterprising, I don't know, in the 17th century. But no, that's not what happened. What happened is, just as you said, the attitude of the society in general towards entrepreneurs changed. So you were allowed to have a go. And you were. Everyone was allowed to have a go. And that was just transformative. How did you advance in Shakespeare's time? You advanced by being a servant of the aristocracy or the queen. That's how you advanced. And in fact, in Shakespeare's plays, none of the heroes, even in The Merchant of Venice, are entrepreneurs. Shylock, needless to say, is not a hero in the sort of conventional sense of the word. And Antonio, who's the merchant, is a fool for love. And so the bourgeoisie, the middle class, is not treated with respect, is not allowed. They're regulated and they're undignified, and that's shameful that you buy low and sell high. Gandhi said, I've never heard of anything so evil as buying low and selling high. Now this is loco. This is insane. Buying low and selling high is how we create value in our society, in any society, in a socialist society as well. So there was a tremendous change in attitude, which I can see happening in plays and diaries and in politics and law, really focused on the 18th century. England in Shakespeare's time is very much an aristocratic-oriented society of hierarchy. And by 1800, by the time of my beloved Jane Austen's not bourgeois in a sense. She's low gentry, the daughter of a clergyman, but she's not scornful of the new men and women, especially men. And she was very proud that as a woman, she made money at her books, with her books.
And you talk about, dare we say it, religion as a catalyst as well.
I do, except that I don't take Max Weber's view, because I don't think
Max Weber being Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism.
And the Spirit of Capitalism, a great book, one of the great books of the first half of the 20th century, an astonishing book. Everyone here should read The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism in German if you have German. It focuses on Calvinism and on the anxiety about salvation. And that's not it. Ever since he wrote the book in 1905, it's been attacked for its theology, for its sociology, for its economics. It's still such a charming book that people keep going back to it and saying, ah, yes, that's it. A change in attitude inside the minds of these business
internal
people.
Attitude.
Internal, and it's not. It's a change in external attitudes. And that's where we get the modern world. And to express it in a word that'll surprise you, I think, it's liberalism. But it's liberalism in the root sense, not in the crazy definition that we now have it in the United States, where actually what liberalism means in the newspaper these days is slow socialism. And I'm against slow socialism, fast too.
Right. But in terms of religion, not only in terms of ruling out the internal change that religion might have sparked, you think about the organization of religion.
I didn't quite complete that idea.
Okay.
I got all excited about
It's exciting.
my figure of speech. But no, it's church governance that was the real inspiriting matter. Students of the Reformation speak of the magisterial Reformation of what became the Lutheran Church, or my own church, the Anglican Church, where there's still a hierarchy. Whereas the radical branch of the Reformation appointed its own ministers. That's what congregationalism means, that the congregation appoints the minister. And indeed, the extreme case is in the 1640s, there develops the Society of Friends, the Quakers, and they don't have any ministers. They just, we could have a Quaker meeting right now if we wanted to. We'd sit here and wait until the Spirit of the Lord descended on someone here, and then they'd get up
and the inner light shines.
And that's right, the inner light. So it's that experience of taking charge of your spiritual life. It's not something that the priests do and you come to church and you just kind of sit there and cross yourself. That's it. No. You're taking charge of your life. And that is not the only accident of European society in the 3 centuries before 1800, but it's a quite important one.
You talk about liberty, justice, equality, and equality before the law.
Yeah, justice is equality before the law. You have to get them separated out. Yeah, but it's all equality, by the way. It's all equality. Social equality, economic equality, legal equality.
So here's what confuses me, because you're very optimistic, inspired indeed by the growth in China and India. Mm-hmm. But we know that China, we have a nomenclatura, chosen ones of the Communist Party, so some are more equal than others, as Orwell said.
They're the pigs.
We're talking Animal Farm.
We are.
Okay. And
by the way, he tried to sell his book in the United States, and he got a rejection letter from a publisher which said, "We're not doing animal books this year." That's literally the case.
and Melville was told they're not doing whaling books.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Right.
That, by the way, is a very economic book, a very economistic
Well,
book.
and as you point out, whale oil got overtaken by events.
It did.
But okay, let's try to stay focused here. I'm as guilty as you are. Right, okay. So we were talking about the lack of equality before the law in China. And India, of course, is riven by a caste system.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so
is.
How are they booming if they lack the equality that you believe is so central?
Because they have the equality, the equality in Smith's words of liberty. They haven't got equal, certainly in China, not equal political rights. Every official, government official, from the garbage collector up to the up to the Politburo or the Central Committee has to be a member of the Communist Party. But economically, you can do pretty much what you want. I went to China for the first time. In the fall, if you haven't been to China, do it, because it is stunning. I was in Shanghai, and I had to explain to my hosts the American word rube. A rube is a person who comes to Kansas City and says, my God, everything's up to date in Kansas City. They've gone about as far as they can go. And so I said, you have to know this American word, because that's how I felt in Shanghai. I said, oh, wow, gee whiz, oh gosh. And that was because of economic liberty. Now, we're all hoping that the Chinese Communist Party can get off riding the leopard without terrible consequences. You know, as long as you stay on the back of the I forget, it's the tiger, I guess. You stay on the back of the tiger, you're riding the tiger, everything's fine. You fall off the tiger eats you. So I don't know quite how they're going to make that transition.
Will that lack...
The Indians already have. They're, crazy though it is, it's a democracy.
Well, on China, just for a minute, will that lack of equality end up being self-limiting for their growth?
No, I don't think so, because they have a deep social equality, and they've had it for a long time. It's an interesting fact about China compared with, say Japan or Europe, that they didn't ever have feudalism, or they had it long time ago. 2,000 years ago, they had feudalism. Oddly, China is a very egalitarian society, and if you're rich, that's okay. In fact, they've always been that way. Always, for a long time. So I'm very encouraged by China. It's a startling place.
And India.
But I'm also encouraged by India.
Right. I'm using the straw man of the caste system. So knock that one down.
Well, that's a little harder. Although the current prime minister is not a Brahmin, whereas it's the Brahmins. It's the Brahmins who imposed Western socialism on India after independence. Nehru, for example, spoke of the Brahmin service culture, something like that. The we Brahmins himself, we help you poor other people. And that's not the attitude of the modern Indian entrepreneur. These are rough, lower caste, not untouchables, but lower caste people who are, they're going for it. And I think that's the way forward for any society, to have a go, you make mistakes. If you do, you go bankrupt. If you have an industrial policy run by the government, if you make mistakes, you keep doing it.
And they did for about 40 years.
Well, they keep doing it. People think, I'm not an Obama hater by any means. I think he was well, let's not get into it. But one big mistake he made was this foolishness about wind power, subsidizing wind power. Why? Let's subsidize ice cream. Why not? Ice cream's good.
There are dairy subsidies, aren't there?
There is.
So I suppose we do subsidize ice cream.
We actually, you're exactly correct about that.
All right, so let's review. Right, we had the Great Enrichment. We have the trade-tested betterment.
That's my phrase for capitalism. I don't like the word capitalism because it draws attention to capital accumulation as though that itself caused innovation. Capital accumulation doesn't work unless you've got a good idea. If you've got a stupid idea, you build buildings that no one wants.
And we test those ideas by trade.
In a market, because then people put their money where their mouth is.
And we solve the puzzle of why that got to happen because of religion, equality, attitude. But then there's actually a villain of the piece.
The villain.
The villain is another phrase you coined, the clerisy.
The clerisy.
Who are the clerisy?
Well, it's actually a German word which came into English in this sense, but was adopted from German by Coleridge, Samuel Taylor. And all I mean by it is the intellectuals, there's some of them here. Look to your left, look to your right. If you
I've got a
find one of these
scarlet
people,
letter right here.
Be careful, because the clerisy are the journalists, the professors. I admit to it. They're the artists and the intellectuals in general. And very strangely, and for reasons that I do not completely understand, after 1848, which was an important year in European history, the clerisy, mainly I must say the sons, wasn't so much the daughters, but the sons of the bourgeoisie. Marx's father was a lawyer, Engels' father was a mill owner, and he was too. These sons, in a fathers and sons strange change, turned against trade-tested betterment. Flaubert said, hatred of the bourgeoisie is the beginning of virtue. And you see this in Jean-Paul Sartre and in Simone de Beauvoir, saying all evil comes from the bourgeoisie of France. And it's ridiculous.
Right, but that's the new puzzle.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, well, why? It beats me. I'm supposed to be the answer lady here, and I don't know the answer to that. There's a sense in which the avant-garde begins in the middle and maybe early in the 19th century. It happens in art, it happens in music, it happens in poetry and lots of other things, that you're always rebelling against the previous generation. The English professors speak of the anxiety of influence, that you're trying to, speak in Freudian terms, you're killing your father and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know why that happens, though. If I say that, I don't know why that suddenly changes. But one possibility, and Isaiah Berlin, who's a hero of mine, thought this was true. It's the Romantic movement. It's the German Romantic movement that spreads over the whole world, where the artist is elevated to this heroic position and is against commerce. Whereas Mozart wasn't against commerce. Bach, any of the Bachs, were craftsmen and sold their stuff. They read the autobiography of Cellini. Is that his name? Yes. And he brags about his commissions from the Pope. And that changes, and the artist becomes this hero, and this anti-commercial hero, this cultural hero. I think it may have to do with the decline of Christianity, although that really doesn't get going until the late 19th century. So I'm very puzzled by this, but it's very powerful. Just as an example, I gave an early version of my books as a talk to the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton in the early 90s. I've been working on this a long time. And the secretary called me up in far Iowa, where I was teaching at the University of Iowa. Go Hawks. And she said, we need the title of your talk. And I said, it's going to be Bourgeois Virtue. And she laughed and said, oh, that's a contradiction in terms, isn't it? And that more or less encapsulates the attitude that so many of the clerisy have, that oh, well, you're just in business. You're just making me rich. You're just giving me a good pension. I mean, gee, it's so irritating. It's such a false ethical position to be in, to take advantage of the the creative powers of people allowed to have a go, and then to sneer at them.
And the clerisy has, if I may borrow your word.
Please do.
Yeah.
It's free.
Has a big idea that they're pushing, I think, right now, and that is the evil of inequality.
Mm-hmm. Well, they keep coming up with new evils. As I said, I'm a heavily reformed Marxist. And in my day, when I believed the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle, and that's all you needed to know, I thought that the big problem was just was property. And then it was going to be a miserization of the working class. Well, that didn't work out so well. And then it was going to be alienation of the working class, the young Marx, as we used to say. No, that didn't work out so well. Then it was advertising, then it was this, then it was that. All these imperfections. In fact, my colleagues in bourgeois mainstream, as we call it, economics, did the same thing. From 1848 on, one economist after another said, oh, there's monopoly, there's externalities, there's informational asymmetries, and for many of these you got a Nobel Prize. And yet, in this very time that they were talking about, income per head increased by a factor of 30, 3,000% approximately. So this is this terribly imperfect and awful society that made ordinary people, even the poorest among us, vastly better off.
And that's where you really culminate, which is that every society should be judged by not equality, but enrichment.
That's right. That the best welfare program for poor people is economic growth. I have a piece in the Times, which unfortunately came out on Christmas Day, so no one knows about it, making this point. And it's just obvious. You can redistribute income, and we do, and some of that I approve of. Supporting K through 12 education, although not through the state, but still, I'm in favor of me being taxed to take care of that. And helping handicapped people and so on. I'm all for that, but the problem with that is that there are grave limits to how much taxing you and giving it to the poor helps the poor. Whereas 3,000% is very much higher than 100%.
A lot of people in this room would go for that 3,000%.
Yeah, I think so.
I think so.
And look, I want to emphasize, it's not just about the 3,000%. I told you I'm an Episcopalian, and I believe that if you acquire the whole world but lose your immortal soul, to hell with acquiring the whole world. I don't want to. If we had been terribly corrupted in spirit by our economic success, I would be against economic success. But we haven't. Au contraire, as the French say. It's the other way around. It's in rich societies that we can have institutions like this and conversations like this. Our ancestors, my great-great-great-great-grandparents, Irish peasants, spent their whole time in the kitchen and the garden, occasionally in the field, and that was it. That was their intellectual and spiritual life. So I don't want to put it all on. Humans don't live by bread alone, but I say that a society that's prosperous in the sense that we are and can be even more is a society in which people can pursue the transcendent in art or science or baseball, current obsession of mine with the Chicago Cubs doing as they did last year. Not so good this year. And so it's not just about matter. It's not just about vulgar goods. Although, hey, I'm in favor of vulgar goods.
We're about to open it up for question, but when you buy this book, please turn to page 72 if you want some nice predictions. We should expect during the next 100 years then a world spiritual change enabled by much higher real incomes. In 54 years at that conservative 4% a year, world income will rise by a factor of about 8. By the middle of our 21st century, it will have resulted in a big bang of world culture, with sub-Saharan Africa by the early 22nd century in the lead.
Absolutely.
So the long view and an optimistic one.
That's right.
Questions? She said she'd answer anything.
And the answer, lady, if you have problems in your love life, I can consult.
In the back there, wait for the microphone. Tell us who you are in the form of a question.
Have we got a microphone?
Yeah, there is one back there.
My question is, why Sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, that's an odd story. Everyone in this room is an African. I think most of you understand this. We all come from Africa. Most of the people in this room, their ancestors came out of Africa and turned left, went north and turned left again. Those are called Europeans. And the result of that is, because they came out in small hunter-gatherer bands. So sampling theory says that if you come out in small hunter-gatherer bands, you're going to lose genetic material. You aren't going to have the same genetic variability as in the home. If the whole of sub-Saharan Africa had moved into, I don't know, Asia, then there'd be the same, but it's not. Sample size is too small. So the result is, and this is not some crazy thing that Deirdre believes, and it's not fake news, put it that way. The genetic variability, ask any geneticist this, is much higher in sub-Saharan Africa than anywhere else. The tallest people in the world, the naturally tallest people in the world are sub-Saharan Africans. The naturally shortest people, the most enduring long-distance runners are from East Africa. The fastest sprinters are from West Africa, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This same distribution will be true of artistic ability, mathematical ability, and it won't only be Ashkenazi Jews who are in the violin section.
No.
It'll be, or in the math department. So the result will, the bottom of the distribution is also thicker, but that doesn't matter for high culture. What matters is the top, the extreme, the Armstrongs and the Einsteins out on the right side of the distribution.
And so those, in answer to the question, so those who have never had the chance to
they haven't had the
prosper
chance.
will.
They will, just as we Europeans, we people who turned left, we had the chance, but we didn't have the chance in the 18th century and before. So we were just sitting there being milkmaids and plowmen, and that's it. You're a milkmaid or a plowman. And now the descendants of the milkmaid and the plowman are the professors of history and the fiddlers in the New York.
So you don't see Africa as a reservoir of poverty. You see it as a reservoir of untapped human capital.
Exactly, of opportunity. That's when you focus on Scottish inequality, or Scottish equality instead of French equality. If you say, okay, the problem is not enough foreign aid. Foreign aid, as a previous winner of this prize, Bill Easterly has said, is a disaster. It strengthens these bad governments in sub-Saharan Africa. By the way, Europeans had bad governments. You may have heard of fascism, So let's not get too proud of how wonderful we are, because we, people who turned left, I think that's a good way of talking about Europeans. We who turned left have had our hundreds and hundreds of years of terrible extractive governments. And recently, in the last 15 years or so, Sub-Saharan Africa is showing signs. I mean, look, Botswana is a success. Right next door is Zimbabwe, which is an appalling disaster. But Botswana shows that what can happen. I'm sorry I took too long on that.
No, we're going to
but
get
you pressed a button.
Now we're into a lightning round.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it's a lightning round. Now
All
we
right.
do fast.
Other questions this side of the room this time? Yes, the gentleman right in the middle, John Tierney from City Journal, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. He's from everywhere.
Good. Well, I am too.
Thanks for that fascinating. Thanks for the fascinating interview and for your work. You mentioned the impact of religion. I was struck by Rodney Stark's book, How the West Won, where he gives Christianity a lot of credit for it, for why this Great Enrichment happened in Europe, and he wonders how much that will affect other societies. He's very critical about Islam as far as encouraging development. What do you make of that?
I think highly of Stark's work in general. This guy's a sociologist of religion, and he's very good. But this Christocentric way of looking at the world, or Abrahamic-centric way, if you want to extend it a bit, of course, then that doesn't include Islam, is, I think, a mistake. Look, if you're going to bet in 1492 which part of the world was going to have a great enrichment, you would have bet on China. You would have bet the farm on China. You would have had to have been crazy to bet on anyone else. The Chinese had the most advanced technology, the most advanced intellectual life. They had peace, prosperity. They were in great shape, wonderful transport modes, the longest canals in the world. The Grand Canal was. So it can't be it can't be deep Christian or even Abrahamic virtue that's at stake here. Now look, you can talk about the emphasis on individualism in Abrahamic religions, but they went for thousands of years without doing anything. And indeed, Islam in the 3 centuries after the Arab conquest was a brilliant society, wonderfully advancing in all kinds of realms, mathematics, philosophy, horticulture, amazing stuff. And then they froze up. And the same thing happened to China. So by accident, it's not some deep virtue that white people have, and it's certainly not some deep virtue that Christians have that did this. Because look, take another example. The Orthodox Christians were not leaders of the economic growth. Russian Orthodoxy was not a progressive force.
And so Islam will not hold back Muslims.
Not in the end, it won't. Although it's not Islam. It's these nutcases. Look. We Christians and Jews and Buddhists and Hindus who have race riots all the time, we're not exempt from this madness, which says, I believe in Allah, Allah Akbar, and I want to blow you up. My friend John Mueller, a very good political scientist at Ohio State, points out that in the West, terrorism has gone down in the last 40 years. Remember the 1960s and 70s, the Baader-Meinhof gang. It's
The Weather Underground.
Absolutely, blowing people up. I have a colleague actually at UIC who was one of them. So, anyway, again, this is supposed to be a lightning round, and here I am.
I think we got time only for one more, and I'm going to get.
Let's make it a woman.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing, right over here on the left.
Thank you again for your talk. You mentioned, so you were saying that capital accumulation doesn't work unless you have good ideas, and you said that capital was not sufficient, but the ideas were both sufficient and necessary. So in the US context for entrepreneurs of color, there's disparities in obviously the rates that they exist here, but there's not necessarily, the data doesn't show that there's differences in nascent activity, for example. And so the literature points to capital, that it's the lack of access to capital. So how does your framework sort of address that?
I don't think it's the lack of access to capital, although having been redlined myself for a mortgage in 1975 in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago, I was turned down. You know, look, I'm white, you may have noticed. And I was turned down because I lived in a neighborhood which was mixed. So I understand the point. But just like foreign aid, just as Bill says about foreign aid, domestic aid just poured onto poor communities is not gonna do it. What we need is to take the hooks and chairs out of the way. Look, the south and west side of Chicago ought to be in hives of industrial activity. They were in the 19th century. When the ancestors of most of this room came to the United States, they got jobs. They got jobs in the garment industry. They got jobs. Mine built the railways and so on. They got jobs. What we've done is we've obstructed hiring. The intervention in the wage bargain, which is supposed to make workers better off, doesn't. It's like the
minimum wage you're talking.
Yeah, but it's not just the minimum wage. It's all kinds of obstacles to making a bargain with an entrepreneur, and that makes the south and west side of Chicago worse off. Zoning adds to it. You can't start a factory wherever you want. People will say, "Oh no, not in my backyard," or even not in your backyard, and that's the most irritating part. And then there's the war on drugs. And you put those three together, and you've got, especially the west side of Chicago, is appalling. You need to drive through it to see. So, look, letting people have a go, that's the key. Not I'm going to make people unhappy, not education. People say, oh, well, we have a high minimum wage. The solution is to make everyone have a PhD or an engineering degree, and then they'll all be worth the high minimum wage. That's got it backwards. Let people open a shop, have a fruit stand. Look, in Chicago, unlike New York, it's virtually impossible to sell food on the street. Food trucks are heavily regulated, essentially prohibited. And you never see hot dog stands like you see in Manhattan. Well, why is that? Because the brick and mortar restaurant owners run the Chicago City Council. So they don't want any of this crap, and they don't have it. Well, that's to make it impossible for the young man who comes from the Dominican Republic to find a way that his children can prosper and go to university. So we, the middle class, we're the ones who are, because we want to protect our children from drugs, we hurt the poor. And we got to stop doing it. We have to let the poor work like we all do.
Not aid, but opportunity.
Not aid, but opportunity. Not French equality, but Scottish equality.
I'll get that on a bumper sticker. Please join me in thanking Deirdre McCloskey.